Welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage family, friends, neighbors, really anyone who's caring for someone else. My name's Katie Muirhead, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the lands that we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. I'm joining you today from the city of St. Catharines in the Niagara region, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous peoples. If you'd like to learn more about the lands you're joining from, you can find out more at native-land.ca. Whether you're currently providing care or preparing for a future caregiving role, today's webinar offers real, practical guidance on how to have the conversations that matter most. Our guests today will share insights from their work and personal experiences, exploring how open, honest dialogue can reduce stress, strengthen relationships, and help navigate difficult decisions. We hope that after our talk today, you'll take away some practical communication tips for caregivers, guidance on how to start and manage tough conversations, and build in some supportive strategies to help you feel more confident in your role. Joining us today, we have Amy Kupal, who is the CEO of the Ontario Caregiver Organization, also known as OCO. Her collaborative leadership charts the path for our organization to stay intensely committed to our mission, which is to improve the lives of Ontario's 4 million caregivers and counting, which I'm sure she'll talk about today. Amy brings more than 20 years of experience to her role and has a deep understanding of the benefits and challenges associated with caregiving. As a caregiver for most of her life, Amy helped to support her brother who had cerebral palsy. She was also a caregiver to her mother throughout her cancer journey and now supports her father through older adulthood. Also joining us today is Laura Tamblin-Watts. Laura is the CEO of CanAge, Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. She teaches law and aging at the University of Toronto and is the author of Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real-life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. Laura is also a caregiver to her parents. So I'm going to turn it over now to Laura and Amy to get us started.
Katie, thanks so much for introducing this webinar and our time together. And Laura, thank you so very much for joining us to talk about this really important topic today. This is something that we've been discussing a lot in terms of preparing to care at OCO. We issued a report this winter where we shared some insights that we had gained from prospective caregivers, people who anticipate that they'll take on a caregiving responsibility within the next 5 years. And so most of those people are looking ahead because they have older adults in their lives, and those might be parents, in-laws, friends, neighbors, community members who they think may need some caregiving support in the next 5 years. And I know that this is an area that you are both extremely passionate and knowledgeable about. So we wanted to bring you in to really bring to life some of the concepts and concerns that we heard about in that report. You know, we've got 2.5 million people who anticipate becoming caregivers between now and 2030. That takes Ontario's caregiving population from 4 million now to 6.5 in a very short period of time. And the majority of those people say, yes, we need to have a plan, but less than half of them have a plan. And so this is where the kind of work that you're doing and what you talked about in your book is so important, because we know that one of the key reasons that people are not planning is because of discomfort associated with having those conversations. So caregivers and prospective caregivers told us, I feel discomfort, and I'm also worried about the discomfort of the person that I may be caring for. So we want to do some myth busting today. We want to talk about some practical solutions and really give people some ideas of where they can go from here. So I'd love to hear just some of your early thoughts about the book, why you wrote it, and why you think it's so important.
So I wrote the book not because I wanted to write the book, Amy. I wrote the book because I wanted to have the book. Think about how many pregnancy books there are, how many books in the first year of life or toddlers or preschool years, literally tens of thousands of those books. And that's actually maybe 6 years if you're really extending it into elementary school. Those go by fast. But when we're thinking about kind of aging, and I'm using this term really broadly, really important. I use the term, let's talk about aging parents, and then I spend the entire first chapter disclaiming that I don't necessarily mean about aging parents. I mean anyone that you have in your circle. Could be, in fact, your spouse or partner, could be your neighbor, could be someone in your built family. It could be someone actually that you would not necessarily have a close connection to, but you feel like you've got an obligation to, right? And there was no place to put all the hacks in. There was no place to go and sort of say, okay, well, this has happened really fast, i.e., mom has fallen and broken a hip, and now we're in a place that we weren't in yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Now mom can't go home, right? We thought everything was fine until it wasn't. Or dad's been slipping with dementia for a while, but we're not sure it's dementia because we can't get him diagnosed because he doesn't want to go get diagnosed. Let me know if you think this sounds familiar. And I don't really necessarily want to confront it either because it's going to change my life. It's going to change everyone's life. And as long as we kind of all don't say anything, and maybe they feel like there's no treatment anyway. So what's the point of poking that bear, right? So what do? And then how do I navigate these relationships? The book also starts off by disclaiming when I'm talking about family, with all of those provisos of what that can mean in a person's life. It also means that it's not that leave it to beaver pretty family. Most of the time, people don't want to have these conversations or don't plan because, frankly, not only is it uncomfortable, which, it is, right? But also because they don't have this real narrative about actually how people work together. You know what? If you've got mental health and addictions in your family, you're normal. If you've got drug and alcohol abuse that's prevalent or historical, you're normal. If you've got that sibling, cousin, uncle that you can't stand, normal. Second, third, fourth marriages in your family, normal. And yet almost all the materials out there, to the degree that there were, and there weren't a lot, were about like a person's journey with my most beloved family member. You're like, well, okay. I get to soccer practice, and actually we're not even a club, not a sandwich generation. We're a club sandwich generation. I got to take care of my great aunt and my mom and the kids and my kid with ADHD and my whatever else it is. And so this sort of image of this perfect family, I think, was one of the most inhibiting factors. So I wrote a book that's, I hope, funny and practical and kind of tells it like it is.
You've already called out so many important points. And one thing I want to make sure people are clear on is this idea of the sandwich generation, or as you say, the club sandwich. So the sandwich generation I fall into, right? Where I still have kids at home, but I'm also caring for an older adult in my life, and I'm in the middle of that sandwich. But many people are in club sandwich types of situations where there's many layers, right? You may be caring for your child, you may be caring for your spouse, you may be caring for a friend or neighbor, and it also might not be nuclear families. It may not be in the same geographical space. There are so many different variations in terms of how people define family, how people choose who their caregivers are or are not, right? And also what permissions or parameters people have put around these kinds of things. But that's why we have to have a conversation.
We do. And I mean, think about generations as about every 15 to 20 years. And I had this happen about 2 months ago. because there was a man who was about 70-ish, early 70s, who was in a car accident, he, like 2/3 of other Ontarians, and frankly, 2/3 of other Canadians, didn't have a substitute decision-making document like a power of attorney. Ontario, we call that a power of attorney for personal care. If you're joining from BC, you'd call it a representation agreement. If you're joining from Nova Scotia, you'd call it a personal care directive, because of course we have to give everything different, confusing names, right? Okay, he didn't have that, and somebody needed to make a decision for him, and also financial decisions, right? That power of attorney for financial decisions are two separate documents, and we had to find somebody to help him, and he didn't have any kids, and he didn't, we found his dad in a long-term care home outside of Quebec City. His dad was 97. And we said, sir, I need you to make a substitute decision for your son who needed a surgical decision made pursuant to this car accident. And I love his comment to me. He says, well, I guess you never stop really being a parent. And if you exchange that word parent for caregiver, I think folks will find that, because 97, in this case, 70s, 50s, 30s, and then continue on. We even have 6 generations in the workforce. So it's important to remember many people will be care supporters and recipients of care, and they may not use those names, which we all know, at the same time. Quite often, you're the person that's getting some help and giving some help concurrently. So these don't always happen in these sort of age-based blocks, right? You're not only just looking for that person that's 20 years older than you.
Right. And, I really appreciate that you've called out reciprocity, because there often is reciprocity in these caregiving relationships. Spousal caregiving is an example where it can be very mutual, right? Times where one spouse takes care of the other, and then the other way around during periods of illness, accident, decline, whatever the case may be. But it can happen in any of the combinations of relationships in our lives. If we think about the example that you just gave and also tie it in with our Preparing to Care report, one of the things that we know is so important but doesn't happen often enough is to have a plan. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like. If people don't know how to start, but they know they need a plan with any of their relationships, right? Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's the neighbor down the hall who you realize nobody else is coming and going. Where would you recommend people start?
So the book is kind of a plan. I mean, I'm not pushing it too much, but it literally does walk you through. So there's 4 big chunks in any plan. Won't be a surprise to anyone. There's 4 big chunks in the book as well, right? The first big chunk is around where do people live and what health supports do they need, right? So a whole bunch of stuff in that. The second big chunk is who gets to decide, right? And who gets to decide if I make a decision or a plan? What happens if I don't make a decision or plan? Who gets to decide if someone's elbowing their way in, right? Who gets to decide if I decide I don't want to decide, right? Like all of the who gets to decide stuff. There's a third chunk about, I'm going to call it relationships. What about, the most now evolutionarily present thing that every family lawyer is dealing with? Older divorce. Right? It's skyrocketing, right? We don't think about people getting divorced in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, but it really is. How about if dad starts dating at 92? What do you do about that? What about guilt? There's a whole section on guilt, and you need to make a plan that includes things like, how am I going to deal with my own guilt? How am I going to deal with somebody else's guilt? How am I going to deal with the cultural norm that my mother assumes that she's going to move in because that's the cultural norm? Though not really, Mom. I know that you would never ever move in with me. I'm far too messy a person. But the cultural norm and the expectations that one part of the kid's family is saying, well, of course I'm just going to move in with you and you're going to take care of me, versus their spouse who's like, your mother is not living with us. Like, that's actually not happening, right? How do you break apart those things and really look at them? And then there's kind of the everything else stuff. What about technology? What about driving? What about, romance scams? What about those types of things? The plan you make has to cover each of those pillars: where you live and your health, what it is around deciding who gets to decide, or if I don't decide, what happens? What about all the relationships and how do you deal with that, including your relationship with yourself and the sleep you're not getting at 3 a.m.? And then there's the other bundle of stuff that you should make sure that you look at. I'll just finish by saying it's important that you make your plan, but assume that other people are making a plan and you're a character in their story as well. So sometimes the person who's often like the lead caregiver is making their plan and they're expecting that everyone's going to follow it. And that can happen at least 2 or 3 times in the course of 25 years of my career. But remember, someone else is sitting there making a plan and they still remember that time where you like took the head off their Barbie doll, and they may not be quite over it, thanks to my brother, who, by the way, I'll never quite forgive on that as well. So people are going to be who they already are.
Mhm.
And they're going to have different opinions of what the plan should be as well. So you got to make it for yourself, but taking into account who are the people in the story and what are they really like. As we age, we only become much more profound, exaggerated versions of ourselves. So no one's going to wake up one day and be a totally different person.
Which is an important thing for us to remember. So let's talk a little bit about where you're going to live. We talk a lot in the kinds of work that we do here at OCO, and that you and I, cross paths in our work together around aging in place.
Yep.
But aging in place really requires a plan.
Oh, yes.
And the other thing about aging in place is it's based on a set of assumptions about what someone's needs will be, what their health status will be, that there won't be a disaster or an emergency or a fall or a diagnosis. And so if people here are just trying to think about, oh, right, I was just working on an assumption that this is what will happen for this person in my life, what would you want to plant as one seed or one myth that you would want to debunk?
Take age out of it. Okay, for actually most of the stuff, just take age out of it, because everything that you're going to do also helps if you're blown out your knee, which I had done at one point in my life, or you've got, an inability to use this elbow because you've been playing too much tennis, or whatever it is that you've done. All of this stuff works like an emergency situation. So if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and you're worried about kind of getting into uncomfortable age-based conversations, you can think about where are you going to live and how are you going to live there. What if your leg was in a cast? How would you get from point A to point B? How would we manage those stairs, right? What if you're doing things in an active and engaged way and something bad happens? That's a really nice way in, because it doesn't make people confront often their own aging or their tip of the iceberg problems, right? Like once you start having that, it feels like there's going to be a push about a bunch of other things.
Right.
When you're thinking about that, think about physical, emotional, and social, right? So the physical built environment, the book literally walks you through every single room in your house and gives you hacks. So for instance, stairs are not the enemy. Falling is the enemy. Did you know that if you spend, I don't know, $80 last time I looked at a home store with some really good clamps, and you put a new banister, so 2 banisters, not 1, you reduce your falls risk by 56%.
Wow.
And why that matters is the most conservative estimates, and they're going up since I've last checked them, the most conservative estimates, if you fall and break your hip and you're a person over the age of 70, particularly a woman over 75, your chances of dying in 24 months is more than 40%. The first year is more than 24%. And if you don't die, your chances of ever walking normally again as an older woman are less than 20%. So if you're thinking about how easy it is to put double banisters, it's simple. Maybe if you're making the preparations, you could also think about, do you have young kids in the house? Or then you can put lower banisters that help for everybody. It doesn't only need to be you as an old person needs this help, right? So think about the physical built environment. Those stopgap measures can actually change your stairs into ramps with removable ramps. You can get them for like $200, right? So sometimes people think about modifying their home and they make a really big, like, oh, I've got to put an elevator in. It's going to cost me $500,000. No, there's lots of things you can do. Don't have a main floor bedroom? One of the biggest ones. What about the dining room that nobody has used since 2003, with the antique sideboards in it and the chairs that nobody wants to sit on, right? You know what I mean? Maybe take those out, put sliding barn doors, and all of a sudden you've got a large, accessible main floor bedroom, right? If you don't have a main floor bathroom, that's a full bath, you've only got a half bath. Change it with just a little bit of taping and get a shower extender out of your faucet, and all of a sudden it's a Swedish wet room and you can actually be on that main floor. Don't have enough money to stay there. Maybe you're going to do a Golden Girls style, which is kind of a fun thing to do. That leads into the second, right? That leads into the fact that most people can overcome some of the built environment issues if they really think about it. But what we know is most important is relationships, right? So where do you want to be and who do you want to be there with? And so you've got to really plan for where you're going to live. If you think you're going to move to the cottage, okay. Actually, the best thing you can do is move to a downtown walkable city core, which is not where I want to live. But the reality of circumstances, if your community is far away from services, you better have a plan that includes transportation also, right? But the social engagement is one of the most important things. You've heard probably of NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. That's really just a bunch of people getting together saying we're going to age in not just the place of my house, but we're going to age in this place of community. And that means you can share things like massage therapy or home care, or put walkability assets in your area. The last thing people really need to worry about also is that financial to support the social, right? And so a lot of people can't stay at home, they think, because they can't afford it. Well, that's an issue, and it's going to get harder. But there are some things you can do that help. And some of them are tax credits, and some of them are bringing in a grad student to live with you. We can plan for those out. It's not an all or nothing approach.
So I'm hearing you highlight a few things that I want to call out. One is about risk and looking at what are the risks in the particular situation for this individual or group of individuals. And are we clear about what those risks are and how we're going to manage them? Another is quality of life. How do you want to live? And how do you want to live even if there is a challenging circumstance that arises, right? And then the last one is, what are the creative or simple solutions, because oftentimes it is something simple that we want to look at and agree to and plan for, right? So I heard those themes coming up in your description. But you acknowledge that your book also has this section around decisions and decision making, which for me says legal, right?
It is.
Who can decide what? And this is an important thing that we navigate with caregivers, because we need to ensure that the person that we're caring for has consented for us to do the various things that we want to do, and for that to be decided in advance, to the example that you gave, in advance of there being a need. So tell us a little bit more about decision making and some of the things that people should be thinking about.
The who's going to decide question, that whole second chunk of the book, really is critical. Many people will just kind of turn their minds away from it. I understand that. I just did my taxes. I hate doing my taxes. But if I don't do it, there's going to be some consequences that happen. But one of the things I did was I got somebody else mostly to do my taxes. There's an accommodating technique about that. And when we think about that not everyone has to do everything by themselves all the time, that can give some comfort, right? Oh, okay. So I don't need to always confront everything. I think about it as two, kind of hold my hands up. This is the low-tech solution for answering things, right? There's one hand that's all about your health and social issues, right? About your body. Where's your body going to live? What's your body going to eat? What's going to happen to your body in terms of healthcare, right? Stuff that happens to your body. And then there's stuff that happens to your stuff. And I'm using the term stuff because people will often say it's about property. And you're like, well, I don't own any property. And I'm like, well, you're wearing clothes. That's property, right? It's your stuff. It's your physical stuff. Yes. Your chair, your desk, your car, your lease or your house, but it's also your passwords. It's your access points to your phone bill. It's your online accounts to things, right? It's everything that's not your body is your stuff. That's as basic we can talk about it. And when you are alive, you got to make a plan for that. And people say, well, what happens if I don't? That's a good question, right? If your body in space, you don't make a plan, which in Ontario would be called a power of attorney for personal care. And again, different terms for the documents in different jurisdictions are slightly different, but the basic is the same. When you're a capable person, I'm walking across the street, it's no problem. I can make my decisions, right? I get hit by a bus, right? There's a list of who gets to decide in every jurisdiction. And it's usually in some kind of piece of legislation called the Substitute Decisions Act in Ontario. Or a default would be their Healthcare Consent Act. And every other jurisdiction's got something kind of similarly named. And it says there's a ranking. Okay, most people don't have a court-ordered guardian, but if you do have someone, for instance, you're supporting somebody on an ongoing basis with a developmental disability, there may be a guardian, but it's rare. It's very rare. The number one is, did you make one of these fancy documents ahead of time? About a third of the people will have made one. I'd like that number to be bigger. Let's talk about that. But if you haven't, there's a list in every different province about who makes the decision. It's kind of even, right? It's your spouse partner first, adult kids and parents, and so on and so forth. In Ontario, there's no close friend.
It's a pretty important piece of information.
It's a very old-fashioned list. It's very kind of blood kin style list in Ontario because our legislation is so out of date. In BC, the ranking is much broader and it takes into account much more of who caregivers really are. Grandparents are listed separately. Grandchildren are listed separately. A close friend is listed separately, but not here. It's going to be that blood family or any other family by birth or adoption. That's your third cousin in California kind of thing. Right. So an important thing to remember is unless you've chosen by making a power of attorney document for your health and personal care stuff about your body, there's going to be someone who decides, but it may not be who you want. What if you're a person who is estranged? Now, if they actively hate you and you have no relationship with them, they're not on the list, they're defaulted, but otherwise it's going to that list. But here's the thing to really remember. I mean, that's not ideal, but there's someone, okay? If you get hit by that bus, you're unconscious in the hospital and you need to pay for something, you gotta pay your mortgage, you gotta pay your bill, you gotta pay your phone bill, whatever it is, hospital bill. There's no default list, Amy. In any jurisdiction in the country, there's no default list. It's not that spouse, partner, adult, child, like those people. No one else has authority unless you have made a power of attorney document, which comes into force and you're incapable, hit by that bus and you're in a coma. Nobody can pay it for you, anything. So if your spouse is, and you think, well, my partner can just pay it. No, utility bills in my name. Actually, my husband can't pay it unless he's been named as an attorney. People are just so surprised. And what happens is the public guardian trustee has to get involved. They don't want your business, right? And so when you're thinking about how the importance of planning, I think, well, do I need to pay for a lawyer? Okay, look, I am a lawyer. Ideally, it would be good because you're going to get all kinds of good advice and thinking. But no, actually, the Ministry of Attorney General's website in Ontario, you can download the kit for free. And you won't realize that. You can Google Power of Attorney Kit, Ministry of Attorney General, or the Public Guardian Trustee's website, if you're in Ontario. In many other jurisdictions, you can also do it without a lawyer as well, BC and Nova Scotia and so on, right? It does depend a little bit. They're critically important. People will think, but I've done that already. But actually they haven't. What they've done is they've made a will. And so I think about it in this way. You're in a coma, it's that power of attorney, it's that substitute decision making. If it's a health decision, your body, there's going to be a default person, may not be who you want. And if there's nobody, it goes to the public guardian trustee. If you're hit by that and someone's got to pay a bill, access your accounts, do anything with your money, your stuff, it's going to go directly to the public guardian trustee. Nobody can do it for you on an interim basis without applying to the court or applying to the BGG. And that's going to take time, energy, and money. If you die, those powers of attorney documents die with you. They live as long as you live, right? And that's when the will kicks in. Now, there's a whole nother section of what happens if you die without a will, but, right? So when I tell people it's really important, I mean, it's fundamental. Your partner may not literally be able to pay the mortgage because we haven't made those powers of attorney documents for finance. They may not be able to access things that they use. It's critically important.
So I think when we look at this decision-making piece, I'm hearing a few things. One is to have a plan for decisions while you're alive, breaking that out between that power of attorney for personal care and the power of attorney for finance, and identifying as the care recipient, who is the person that I trust to be able to do this, to make the decisions aligned with my goals and wishes for me, for my personal care, and also to take care of my finances. That's a really important set of decisions.
And who you pick is really important. And in the book, I go through some thinking about it. Can you have one person do it? More than one person? Who gets to decide? Is there a backup plan? You know, if you ever filled in some of those, emergency sheets for your kids, if I can't pick up my kid, someone else can pick up my kid.
Yeah.
You need a default because you could all be in the same car accident.
So what's the plan? What's the backup?
That's it.
And what's the plan for my personal care and my finances while I'm alive? And then what's the plan for when I or someone else dies
That's it.
around the will? So I want to do this one more time because it's really important. If people are not able for any number of reasons to engage a lawyer around these things,
Sure.
can you just review again how people can do their powers of attorney independently, and can they do the same for a will?
So the answer is yes. Now, I'd say there's 3 kind of ranking sets of choice, okay? Ideally, you go to a legal professional, and they may save you a lot of time, energy, and money. And
Yeah.
they often do them as loss leaders, right? They're often like a couple $100 to do. So unless you've got a really, really complicated trust, then you really should be going to a lawyer. It's often not that expensive. And call around, right? Lots of individual lawyers are a lot cheaper than big firms. You may get a lot more for your money if you do that. Okay, but let's just say you don't. There are now some really good online tools that you can use. There's a few in Canada. Please make sure that's specific to your jurisdiction. If you're listening in from Manitoba, you need the Manitoba one. If you're listening in from PEI, you need the PEI one, right? You must make sure that's in the jurisdiction that you are in. That's critically important. In some cases, if you divide your time between jurisdictions, then you really should get a lawyer because you really should get 2 sets of them.
Okay.
But again, same thing, you can do this twice, right? So what if you have a cottage in Nova Scotia and you have a house in Toronto? You may need 2 sets of documents, okay? But anyway. But there's a lot of good, like kind of not too expensive paid online ones that are pretty good, as long as they are in your jurisdiction. You can look them up. In most jurisdictions in the country, not all, but in most jurisdictions in the country, which includes Ontario, you do not actually need to get a legal professional. There are lots of kits that are legal. The Ministry of Attorney General and the Public Guardian Trustee have the same documents posted on their website. It's just one. And it is a fill-in-the-blank sheet for powers of attorney, not for wills, but for powers of attorney. One will say power of attorney for personal care, one will say power of attorney for property. You need both to cover yourself off. Right. And really important to know, when you're filling those things in yourself, lawyers will help you through this, but if you're filling it in yourself, the default provision for the power of attorney for personal care, your body, is that it's active only, of course, when something bad happens, because I can't just decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to say that Amy should have surgery. We're going to just get that done. Don't even, she's fine, but you know what? I've decided that Amy should have surgery, and someone comes with white coats and takes you away. No, obviously, you only have the document that's about your body can only ever come into force if you lose the mental capacity. Only if you lose mental capacity to do it, okay? Even if you lose the power of speech, you still are capable of communicating. It has to be the mental capacity. So you're in the coma or you've got dementia. How those things get triggered, we should talk about that too, because it's actually quite hard sometimes. When it comes to finance, the money, the stuff, well, the default, if you fill in those blanks, is active right away. So that let me make my husband go and wait in line in COVID for 3 hours outside City Hall to get the parking pass. He got his, and I said, yeah. And by the way, go do mine. I'm going to stay here in this nice warm area and not go out in -30 weather and line up 6 feet apart to renew the parking pass. And he's like, no, you have to come. I said, no, I don't. You remember those powers of attorney documents we filled? The financial ones right away gives you the ability to step out of your shoes and into my shoes, and you're me for the amount of time.
For the parking pass.
For the parking pass. Now, they may call up and say, hey, I just want to check. Did you mean to have someone do this? Mostly people don't care if you're paying for something. They care if you're taking it out. So if he went to the bank and was taking out $100,000, if I had $100,000 to take out, that would be a miracle as well. Let's just say he's taking out that money. I'm expecting the bank would give a call and say, I just want to check that you want this to happen. But it's active right away by default. You have to change it to make it sleep and only spring into effect. And that's kind of like, you get your credit card and it's got that number on it you got to call. The credit card you can carry around, but it's not active.
Right.
And you can have a power of attorney document like that, which sleeps and then springs into effect.
Again, based on capacity.
Only really based on capacity. Although you can write it. I had a friend of mine that I did who worked in war-torn countries, and she said, you know what, if there's a ransom, pay the ransom. It can spring into effect and pay the ransom. But mostly it's for capacity, right? Now, it's easy if I'm in a coma and you're my person I've chosen to be my attorney to get someone to say, oh yeah, no, she really can't make these financial decisions. She's in a coma. What about if I'm in some type of mental fluctuation? What if I'm in a mental health break? What if I've got some dementia and we're trying to figure it out, right? That's where things get hard.
And that's, I think, a whole other conversation that we need to have,
It is.
because if I've learned one thing as a caregiver and in working with caregivers, these things are not linear.
No.
They are not predictable, right? They are not one size fits all. And so part of having these conversations is to have the plan, but also to have the flexibility to adapt with what arises, right? And that, I think, kind of leads us to your third section around relationships.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a lot of trust that's required in order to have the conversations that we've just talked about before. Where are you going to live? How is it going to work? What if your health status changes? Who is your power of attorney? Those require trust. They also require the willingness and interest to have that conversation, which can be challenging for people for lots.
I'm assuming no one really wants to have this conversation.
Right? Nobody wants
So the
to.
book is like full of hacks for how to curate, how to get those conversations going, or those not just conversations, but the actual do.
Right.
We're not just talking about, but doing something about it, matching it to the personality who you're trying to talk with,
Yeah.
and your relationship with that person.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about relationships. And what I'm particularly interested, but you certainly can elaborate on different considerations around relationships, is the circle of care.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And not everyone has a circle of care. So let's be clear about that. We know that there are people who don't have a caregiver. We know there are people who have one caregiver. We know there are people where they're in a mutual caregiving situation and they may or may not have that caregiver there for them when they need them. So again, no one size fits all. But if we think about the concept of a circle of care, where we do not necessarily have all caregivers created equal, right? Somebody might do appointment coordination. Somebody might do driving to appointments. Somebody might be shoveling the snow, right? It could be any number of things. Talk to us a little bit about relationships and some of the things that people should consider around preparing to care and the role of a circle of care.
And it is a privilege to have a circle of care.
It
It's
is.
a really important thing. So the book literally breaks out all the kind of different jobs, from shoveling the snow to driving to appointments to getting groceries to big things like financial stuff, and little things like financial, but I'm going to go to the pharmacy and pick it up. Literally breaks it out. And one of the things I found really helpful is if it's not, Susan from Calgary telling, her brother what to do again, because Susan always thinks that she knows what to do and she zooms in and tells everyone what to do and then leaves again, right? These are real people, real relationships, real stuff. I don't really know Susan from Calgary. If you're Susan, I'm not really talking about you, right? But the book literally does that. And what we found is that if there's something that's neutral, then it's not that power relationship. So I did expect, and has happened, that Susan from Calgary will buy 5 copies of the book and give it to everyone and say, oh, I was just looking at that and I just wanted to, I was just thinking I'd be really good at 1, 7, and 9. And I just wondered if you'd be good at 2, 7, and 3. Oh, 7, we're both doing 7? Oh, okay, let's make a plan. So it's helpful if there's something that's not directing all the time, because power relationships are important in this, right? I usually ask to take age out of it, even though age is often a big part of it.
Sure.
Right. And think about it as a series of what ifs, right? What if someone got sick, right? We all remember COVID. Pretty much all of us got sick at some point. And what if, I broke my knee, and because that's the knee that I drive with, I would be stuck, right? What if I needed to move for work? Right? And I'm not going to be next door. It all works out just fine as long as I live next door to my parents. But what if I take a job in Thailand, right? So that kind of series of what ifs are really helpful. A thing that I've noticed is very useful is I am talking about parents here, but you can add your relationship in to make more sense. We've heard many times that you become, the parent to your parent. Are you the parent to your parent? I'm not. Nobody's the parent to their parent. Your parent's your parent. And the last time you lived with them, they thought you were an idiot. I mean, they liked you and everything probably, but they thought you were an idiot, right? And you were probably 16 and you probably were kind of an idiot. I know I was. Sorry, mom and dad, right? And the minute I walk in that door, I kind of become 16 again, even though I'm not anymore. Like, those things are really important to say. You know what parents love to give? Advice. They love to give advice, right? And often, if you're not in an everyday part of their life, asking their opinion is really useful. My dad loves to talk about financial stuff, right? He's a lawyer. If you're not listening, Dad. And I could not get him to show me his financial documents or where he kept anything or his power of attorney documents or his will, even though I found out, quite accidentally, I am the person who's appointed to do all that stuff. But I still couldn't get, I just, oh, yeah, well, yeah, we should do that sometime, kind of
Right. Defer it.
around the corner. And now all of a sudden. So I asked my dad for his advice, Dad, and this was legitimate. I wasn't being cute about it. I really was redoing my documents. And I said, I would love to see what you've done. I mean, because maybe I could learn from you and see, yeah, maybe you can see how you've set it up. I would really like that because I'm going to go talk to my people. And
Right.
if I could really have a look at your good planning, I would really appreciate that. All of a sudden, how fast do I get those documents? Oh, sure.
Because you asked for advice.
And I wanted advice, and it turns out he did need to update some of those things, and so did I. And then all of a sudden, so knew that, you know what? We could probably all go do that together. Right?
Right.
Oh, and you got your financial planner, or you got your whatever healthcare, you got your OT. You got a physio. My knees it is actually really sticky, Mom, you have someone that you've used for your physio? I'd love to know all about that. Mom hasn't gone back to her physio in 3 years, right? You want mom to go to her physio, but actually you do have a sticky knee, right? Ask for their advice. If you can't ask for their advice, ask what their friends are doing or what terrible thing has happened to their friend. They'll tell you all about the terrible thing that's happened to their friend, right? And that's when you find out that they do not want to live in happy acres, but the other place is quite fine, right? So there's ways into these topics of conversation that respect the dynamic of your relationship.
Which comes back to people's wishes and understanding what their wants and desires are for their life, and then actually having the conversation about what will it take to accomplish that, right? If you do want to stay at home, maybe we do need the banisters, or maybe we do need the main floor bedroom, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe you do actually feel that you need to move and you need to move into more of a NORC type of community. So what is it that you want and how do we get there?
Aging in the right place.
Aging in the right place.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you ask anyone when you want to stay in your house, they're going to say yes, right? That's not really useful. So trying to figure out, and in a conversation, please understand this is many, many small conversations, not one sit down and let me tell you what we're talking about, right? Ask them what they like. So you've been living here for like 60 years. Is it still the same kind of community? I noticed that you're not going to your faith group as much anymore. Has it changed? Oh yeah, my mom said they're playing guitars, and that was the end of it for me. Okay. Right? I always thought the church was really important to her. Turns out, no, the minister who used to preach was really important to her. She really loved him. And now they're playing guitars. And that was the end of that. So if I had thought that church was really important to her, I would have done everything I could, assuming that I understood her wishes and her values of going to church. No, her value was she liked listening to that minister, and when that minister is gone. So opening up these conversations about what do you love, what do you hate, what's bugging you, can help you in many ways. Be prepared to share what you like and you hate, and what other people like and they hate. Those are great ways of thinking about it. Then layer in culture.
And what's important.
And what's important is certain kind of food important. Is a certain types of respect important? Is there expectations unpacking that you should talk about in there? Often people will say things or not say any things in these kind of broad swaths. We're not talking about finance. Any finance ever? Okay. Or health. All health? Well, what about if I want to talk to you about my arch that hurts in my foot? Oh, we can talk about that, right? So sometimes you need other ways in and avoid those big swaths.
Right.
Which are deferral. You have to see what they are. And when I talk about something, you're being deferred out of the way. Culture sometimes means you can't talk about everything to do with health or anything to do about money. Okay, so find other ways in.
And it may be family, it may be community, It may be faith-based group. So I think what you've given us is this sense of lots of entry points.
Yes.
Right? Lots of different conversations depending on the people involved, but depending on the need, depending on any number of circumstances. I want to make sure we have some time for questions, so I'm going to do one more, and then I know my colleagues are going to jump in with some questions. One of the things that I hear a lot in my conversations is about driving.
Oh, yes.
And how to have conversations with people when they may be in a situation where it's no longer safe for them to drive, or you're concerned about their driving. And I see you are opening to chapter 27.
And it's on the last chapter because it's such a common question. I wanted people to be able to find it. It's literally the last chapter in the book because it's the easiest book to find. It's that important a chapter.
So give us just your top line points about driving, and then we'll open it up to some questions.
Find out what driving means to them and find out what they're most afraid of. Is it that they don't really care about driving, but they want to go to the cottage and they're afraid if they have to give up driving, that means they'll never get to go to the cottage again, or visit their friends again, or go to the shop festival, or whatever it is. So unpack the physical act of driving a car with what is it that they want in their life that a car means to them. Okay. Number 2, identify if you're in a rural or urban community. It's a very different conversation.
Right.
Right. In urban communities, you might be able to call a rideshare program. But if you're in a rural community, you probably can't even find a bus, right? It's going to be different. Third thing, assess the real risk. The good news is this: older drivers tend to be actually very good drivers, and they tend to self-limit. This is especially true with women. Women will tend to self-limit. I'm not going to drive at night.
Right.
I'm not going to drive on the big highways. I'm only going to drive in my little neighborhood, right? I'm only going to drive when it's sunny. So those self-limiting things, again, older drivers often will do it. Find out if they're doing it. You may not know, right? You may be thinking, oh, I got to get that license away from them. But they may only be driving in a 6-block radius on a sunny Sunday at 30 kilometers an hour in a 30 zone, not in a 80 zone, which is another question, right? At which point you probably don't need to be too worried about it. Okay, so find out what they're doing. What is their daily habits about it? That's number 2. Urban versus rural, and how much are they doing it? Number 3, identify what driving means to that person personally. This is often where we get into men. It's particularly men of a certain generation. Having a license was a really important rite of passage for a lot of people, right? And there's a lot of dignity associated with it and freedom of choice. If that's a person that it means a lot to them and they won't self-limit, or really just can't be driving anymore, like they've got macular degeneration, they've got dementia, they've got, tremors, right? And they can't hear very well. They probably shouldn't be on the road. Find a way to save face based on who that person is. Okay? If you think that the doctor is going to take away the license, you have another thing coming. Doctors hate to take away the license because it means people won't go back to the doctor again.
Oh, that's a great insight.
Right? Many doctors don't like to give vaccines to young kids because then they remember that. And the worst thing a doctor does to the relationship, particularly for older men, is take away the license. It is a violation often. So they're not probably going to do it. One of the things that you can do is not make it about them. Oh, Dad, no, those new LED lights that just blind me at night. Like I just can't, I'm not even hardly driving anymore because they're about this change in technology. Or there are so many trucks on the road. Remember how it used to be fine to drive the QEW or that big highway or whatever? Now those trucks, they're so dangerous, those trucks. The trucks are dangerous. Not that you shouldn't be driving. The trucks are dangerous. Or use guilt. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it would be great if your grandson could borrow the car for a little bit. They're going to that new school and they just can't afford to have a car at the moment. But would you mind if we borrowed the car for like 2 weeks, right? Maybe 2 weeks, then Dad's got significant dementia, is some unknown amount of time. The last thing I'll say is there are tricks. I did put the list of tricks in. I'm not a fan of the tricks. I don't actually like tricking people, but sometimes people are desperate. So while I will not endorse it, I will say some people will unhook a battery or take out the alternator or hide the keys or replace the keys with other keys that don't quite fit in the lock, or need to change the tires and get rid of the winter tires. And then the shop says it's going to be really expensive to fix the car. And then it's not about attacking that person's sense of self. It's about something else. So I don't love the tricks, but I tell you, sometimes if you're desperate, you have to.
So, I mean, I think one of the things you surfaced in that example is around the ethical considerations.
For sure.
And those have lots of combinations and permutations of consideration. If we think about it in terms of driving, there's the ethical consideration of knowing that someone may not be safe on the road, with the ethical consideration of how you communicate with them and respect their autonomy and navigate that situation. I think one of the things that I've seen myself as a caregiver is that it's a constant balancing act.
Always.
Around what are my obligations to the person that I'm caring for? What have they previously asked me to do? And what are my obligations as a citizen,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And how do I navigate that? I will say, if I use my own example with my dad, there are times when I'm doing things now that lead to uncomfortable conversations. And I will say to him, I am doing this because you asked me to.
Oh,
And this is one of the benefits of having had some conversations earlier where we are implementing plans
Yeah.
now. And now he may not like it, but I can say with confidence and integrity, Dad, you and I talked about this before, and you told me when we reached a juncture like the one we're at now to do this, and I'm doing what you asked me to. And that's not a fun conversation.
No.
He doesn't like it, neither do I particularly. But because we had that prior conversation, I can honestly say to him, you asked me to do this.
I think it's hugely important. One of the big challenges that we have is the person who's often implementing the hard plan becomes the bad guy.
It's tough.
It's tough.
It's
tough for yourself. You become the bad guy. And that's particularly true if you've got the unsuccessful nephew in the basement that's moved in, that's saying, oh, Amy, she's being so mean. She's doing all these things, whisper, whisper, whisper in the ear. Remember, about 1 in 6 older people will be subject to abuse and neglect. And about 2/3 of that abuse and neglect will come from folks who are closest to them. And one of the things that we see is that when people are now having to move when they don't really want to, particularly into a retirement home or long-term care, or the license has got to go, or something that strikes to the autonomy and heart of that person's, if they have somebody whisper in the ear, that is really difficult. And that's why when you're thinking about your plan at the beginning, and I said people are who they are, and under strain, they are who they are even more, you got to have a look to see who else do you need to have this conversation with? Where do you might think that there's going to be risk, and build that in. If there is that user nephew that has historically, been drawing on dad, historically been feeding things in, you better in your plan deal with the reality of the people in your life, not just only focusing on the one older person.
So I'm
Opposite of the circle of care. In fact,
right.
Where's the circle of danger as much?
Right. And you do acknowledge in your book around scams and those kinds of things. And I know Katie's here so that we can do 1 or 2 questions, but can you please highlight for people if they have any concern related to elder abuse or any really inappropriate behavior? What would you recommend that people do in those types of circumstances?
Look, this is such a hard thing because there are so few actual resources. If you are in Ontario, we have a great organization, which is Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, but they're not responding to individual stuff, although we all know everyone tries to help however they can.
Sure.
And if there's an emergency, if there's an immediate concern and somebody's health is issue, you got to call 911 and direct it to ambulance or police. You can report elder abuse to the police. However, you want to have a difficult Thanksgiving dinner, call the police on the unsuccessful nephew in the basement. And I promise you're going to be the bad guy, right? So there's some that you have to be supporting around that. If you think that there's a risk that somebody is going to try to get in financially, you can write all the financial institutions and ask them to put it on file that so-and-so, the new best friend, the person who's inveigled themselves into the life of your person you're supporting is now going around, have new powers of attorney drawn up and is opening up accounts and whatever. You can put financial institutions on notice by writing them a letter and saying to do it. You can make sure that you actually do have a power of attorney document, because that actually gives authority in many cases to actually step in, and that's going to be important. So there's a lot of complexity around it, but you don't just only have to deal with the one-off issue. You have to figure out how can that elder abuse and neglect be affecting their body and their stuff. And remember, many people need all of that important wealth to keep their health. It's only one letter off. It's because it's directly related.
Thanks for that. So I know we're getting close to time. Katie, do you have maybe one question that's percolated to the
Or a
top?
couple, which we'll answer really fast.
Oh my goodness, I hate to interrupt such an important conversation. I feel like we could continue for quite some time, and I'll just quickly remind folks that you can enter your name in to get a copy of Laura's book. Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. So that's available to folks who want to dive a little deeper. We've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm going to do my best to maybe we can rapid fire a couple. And
Why don't you give us
apologies
a
to
couple
those.
and we'll answer them fast and quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and apologies to those who we don't get to, but coming back to your theme around decision making, someone had shared a little and asked some questions around some of the challenging conversations around difficult decisions. So I'm thinking about end of life care, DNRs, do not resuscitate. So it's a bit of a twofold. How do we have these conversations, but also how do we manage them when our care recipient or the person we're providing support to kind of waffles. Maybe they want something one day and then they change their mind another day. Do you have any hot tips for folks on that?
Great question. So the first most important thing is it's expressed wishes when you're capable. So if they're significantly not capable and they're expressing wishes, you still need to take it into account as a context, but it's prior capable wishes, right? So I'll give you an example. If somebody has said for 20 years that they have a very strong opinion about X, they do not want, I don't know, a blood transfusion, and their faith requires that they not do it, and so on and so forth. And then they're in very significant dementia, and they say, maybe I don't know about blood, I don't know. Do you need to pay attention to it? Yes, you do need to pay attention to it, but it is really your prior expressed wishes when you're mentally capable. And those can be tricky, right? But even if a person loses mental capacity to make their own decisions, you still have to consult with them, and you still have to try to take into account what they're saying. And that is hard, right? So the most recent set of wishes are the ones that's most important. So if someone says, I absolutely want X, and then the next day they say, I do not want X, it's the next day. And those changes are important. If you've got something like a short-term memory loss and they can't remember what they said, but every time you ask them that question, they give you the same answer, that counts. That's okay. They may not remember that who would you want to be your decision maker? Oh, I'd want Amy. And then the next day you say, who would you? Oh, I don't know. I never thought about that before, but I would want Amy. And then you say that time and time again. That matters. Okay. End of life decisions are really a challenge. Part of what we need to unpack there is their fear. Most people are afraid of things, but they're not up on whatever the medical knowledge is. Example, my mother-in-law had very, very, very severe brain cancer and had expressed wishes associated with her understanding of what would be involved with her treatment of brain cancer. And then all of a sudden there was a pill.
Right. Different scenario, different decision.
And then she wanted everything because she didn't want to end up because in fact there was this magical improvement, which in fact she's now still alive almost 10 years later because there was a pill. So your previously expressed wishes need to be about what's important to you, right? Not necessarily
Comes back to quality of
comes
life.
back to quality of life. And what the other thing that we know is people get used to things, right? So if you ask somebody at 30 who has no problem with toileting and no problem with maintaining their body and no problem with moving their body in space, and you ask them, what would you never want to live with? And they say, oh, I could never be a paraplegic. And then they're a paraplegic. They're like, I don't love it, but it's okay. And they're actually finding great quality of life. You've got to go in the context that person is in and refresh that. I have another piece of advice. Do not have these conversations 72 hours before or after a family holiday. It's never a good idea. If you're going to raise a glass and toast or do something celebratory, do not have these conversations. Not even if they think like, oh, we're here for Thanksgiving. Great time for us all to get together. No, it is not. Don't do that. Say, I hear you. That's great. Let's schedule something soon, right? Unpack the celebration of the family and all of that stuff that is involved in whatever that celebration is from having these conversations. Do them a different day.
Yeah, the timing is really important, and when and how we have those conversations, most definitely. Kind of tying into this a little bit, you gave a really great outline and breakdown about how we go about getting a power of attorney and what that process looks like. And a great question came in about Well, where does advanced care planning fit into all of this? We have these different things that we talk about that are really important to prepare, and some are connected, some are parallel, some are not connected. So, can you speak really quickly to what advanced care planning is and how or if it ties into POA and those sorts of things?
Advanced care planning is the process for which you try to figure out what you would want and wouldn't want, and who would you want to decide about it if something happened to your body. That's advanced care planning. One of the most important things you can do with advanced care planning is make something like a power of attorney for personal care if you're in Ontario or whatever that is in your local area. That's a document that's part of an advanced care plan. Advanced care plan may say things like, this is a true story. I had somebody who said, no country music wherever I live. It's like, no country music? Is that really an issue? Yeah, quality of life. He hated country and Western music. I was like, okay. And we went around and looked at all kinds of retirement homes. And sure enough, 3 of them played country and Western music, right? Part of his advanced care plan was, I want no country and Western music. Joke, but that was a real quality of life issue for him. I guess he had issues, right? So care planning is all about the stuff. Who would it help? What would I do? Who would be involved in it? What decisions might be important, and so on. Power of attorney for personal care, or whatever it's called in your jurisdiction, is one pillar important thing that only makes the decisions about who gets to decide.
Great. Thank you. That's a really helpful distinction. I'm going to squeeze in one more because I'm hosting and I can.
Mr. Pass, go.
So we had, and this kind of dips into your relationship dynamic section of your book. So we had someone share, their mom is caring for their dad. Mom's experiencing high rates of stress, burnout. She's really struggling. And her sibling are trying to offer as much support as they can, but everyone's having a hard time. There's a bit of resistance to the outside help. So the question is, how can they, as children supporting parents, be supportive to her and have those really productive conversations to try to encourage maybe widening that net of support?
Chapter I think 4 is actually kind of all about that. Like, and I'm not trying to give a flippant answer. It's really important to do that. You get all the care arranged, both volunteer care, maybe financially supported care, maybe public care, and mom fires everybody. Right? How often can we hear about that? Or I don't want someone coming in. Important to remember that you got to figure out what mom wants and doesn't want first. And if she hates anyone in her house, we're going to have to talk with that. Sometimes actually you can do the care in the garden. Not a joke. Like, think about what it is that that person really doesn't want and really understand what it means to them. What if they don't want anyone seeing them naked? Okay, so maybe you're doing the showering then, right? So let's break it out by saying kind of, again, what do you hate? People love to tell you what they hate, right?
And what's important to you?
And what's important, but what I've noticed is it's easier to say what you hate and then figure out what's important. They go, well, no is easy to get to, and let them get the no out. And sometimes the no is actually an expression of autonomy. It's not happening to them. It's happening. Is there anyone that you know that they have someone coming in? Oh, yes, Sharon. She's lovely. She comes in next door. Okay, Sharon. I'm going to go talk to Sharon, right? Maybe you can think about what are the different things, figuring out, give that person the power to say what they don't want, and then figure out what they do like, and then find your way in.
Great. Yes, we got to get creative as caregivers. It's a big part of what we do. Thank you both. Thank you, Laura and Amy, for such a wonderful talk. We're getting tons of great positive feedback in the chat. What a wonderful, most needed and informative talk. So I want to thank you both for joining us today. And I want to thank everyone who's still on the call for making time. We hope to see you at our next webinar, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks everyone on the team who made this happen. We appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Laura.
So much fun.
It was great.